Well, welcome to this series, week number 6, believe it or not, of the series Church at Work, where we're just seeing how God is at work in and through people like what you're seeing on panels. And so let me ask you a question. How would you like to be me and our teaching pastors, having to follow that up every single week? But we try to do it by tying a biblical person, a person who in history walked and talked with Jesus and lived out their faith just like we try to do in the different arenas of life. And no matter whether or not you connect with being an educator, you're going to connect with what we're going to look at today and what the heart of this series truly is. So I want to welcome you back to this. I want to welcome our online television family. It goes way beyond this room. So if you're tuning in, watching in your PJs or whatever that looks like today, we welcome you. It's a big family at Blackhawk, and I want you to know I'm honored to be a part of it. So I want to invite you to the book of Luke today, the book of Luke chapter 2. And so we are in the 6th week of this series. Next week is week 7, and you do not want to miss next week. You talk about some action steps and action opportunities. You're going to have some of that gets tied to this series as we culminate this 7-week focus next Sunday. But as we get there today, looking at educators at work, here's what I want to do. I want to kind of build on the last couple of weeks. The whole series, we're looking at a vertical relationship that has an impact on our horizontal realities. And you're seeing that in each of these panels. In the last couple of weeks, we had medical professionals 2 weeks back where we looked at Luke. We looked at people who were in the medical industry. And then last week, we looked at youth at work. And I want to build on that. And I got to pause and say, Pastor Wees, our own youth and young adult pastor, Mark Hammond, didn't he do an awesome job leading us through that last week? Can we thank him and celebrate last week's work? So we looked at youth at work. And so today I want to go back to Luke's account of Jesus, but want to look at a different passage that we many times may skip over. Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52 is where we'll be. I want to go back to Luke's account where Luke talks about young Jesus, 12-year-old Jesus in Luke chapter 2. And not only does he look at this 12-year-old Jesus, he looks at his own growth. Some of you are already confused. Jesus grew? Well, he was a baby. He was fully God, yes, but he was fully man, and we're going to look at that even today. And so I want to ask you to join me in Luke chapter 2. We're going to look at his own growth. If you're ready for the word this morning, say, uh-huh. Verse 41 of Luke chapter 2 talks of Jesus. I'm going to read from the ESV version, so that's the same Bible that are in the seats around you. If you don't have one, grab your electronics. You can even keep the Bibles here as a gift to you if you need one. Luke chapter 2, verse 41. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents' worst nightmare. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. After 3 days, can you imagine? They found him in the temple sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. Verse 48, and when his parents saw him, they were astonished. You wonder what that word means, and you can look at the Greek word, but I'm just here to tell you, as a dad, I'm just guessing that astonishment was a little bit of a unique level of astonishment, probably much like they were amazed, but also a lot of other emotions attached. You can fill in those blanks. Maybe a little anger. Let's see as the story unfolds. And so they were astonished, and his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father, underline that, we're going to come back there in a minute. Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress. And he said to them, why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house, or about my father's business? It could be translated either way. Verse 50, and they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them, and his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. Verse 52, and Jesus increased or grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Let's unpack this together today. We've talked a little bit about Luke in the previous weeks, and Luke was all about capturing a credible gospel. And so it's interesting that this is the only story in all of the Gospels that records a boy Jesus, a 12-year-old Jesus, Jesus in between his infancy and his manhood and his ministry. It's the only story we have with that. And so a lot of people have even argued that it was a made-up story, but if you look at apocryphal writings, those writings that we don't have in our Bible or in the Gospels, but that record the history that was going on surrounding these events. There are actually a lot of writings about Jesus' childhood, and many of them are extremely interesting. But Luke chose this one to give us a glimpse of this young Jesus and how he grew. Now, Luke in Luke chapter 1, 2 weeks ago I talked to you about Luke chapter 1. He was all about the present evidence of how God was at work in their lives. How is this gospel that he's recording, this record of the life and ministry of Jesus, credible? Well, there's present evidence. You just look around. But he mainly went back to eyewitnesses that were walking and talking with Jesus in the past, because he wasn't one of those. He had to hear from them, but then he experienced it, was the other thing. So he had evidence from all around him. He had eyewitnesses, and then he had his own personal experience with God, and I believe you can connect with that. It's interesting, though, that Luke walked with Paul. Now, when Paul was in prison near the end of his life and ministry, we know that Luke was there. Luke was present with him, and most likely, while Paul was in prison, Luke was out and about getting these eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus and recording them so that he could include them in his gospel that we now read and love, especially at Christmas time. We've just gotten past, we're in Luke 2, just past the Christmas time story, the birth of Jesus. And I find it interesting that 3 times in just the first 2 chapters that we've already looked at in Luke chapters 1 and 2, 3 times Luke uses a phrase like treasured them up in their hearts, stored them up or remembered them in their hearts. And he did this with eyewitnesses. He did this with people who had walked and seen these stories unfold. It's Luke chapter 1, verse 66. He says the same phrase with those seeing John the Baptist be born. Luke chapter 2, verse 19. He says this, that Mary stored and treasured up all of these things in her heart surrounding when the shepherds came to Bethlehem. And then in verse 51 that we just read, we say that Mary treasured and stored all of these things up in her heart after Jesus shared about being about his Father's business in his Father's house. So Luke is showing Theophilus, which is who he's writing to prove that this is a credible account of Jesus. And he's also writing to you and to me to show us that even he, this Gentile foreigner who didn't walk and see every one of these events, that there's a credible account of Jesus' own childhood and his ministry and his growth. And so we get to look at how he grew. Let's talk about growth today. I want to ask you a question. It's in your notes. How do we fill the gaps in our growth? Let me start with a better question. Do you have any gaps in your growth? Those areas where you just don't feel adequate, where you don't feel like you've grown, where you don't feel like you're where God would have you to be. I can remember when I was called to ministry at 17, the kid who said the one thing he would never do is be a pastor like his dad. The kid who would be sick every time there was a presentation where you get up in front of people at school. The kid who had nothing to bring to the table when it comes to being a pastor or let alone in front of people in any kind of way, shape, or form. I felt like I had a gap in my growth. It's like, God, you haven't really grown me to that spot yet, but you want me to preach? And he said, mm-hmm. And I said, God, you're crazy, and he still loved me anyway. If you've never told God he's crazy, I wouldn't suggest it. He didn't strike me down. He still believed in me. There was a gap in my growth. I remember in college taking a test and sitting down. There was one in particular, but I had probably way more than I would care to admit that this happened with. But I sat down, we're talking about educators, to take a test, and I looked and was like, all right. Don't act like you hadn't done the same thing. It's like, we studied this? I don't know the answer to that one, or that one, or that one, or that one. And we have these gaps in our growth, but we fill them spiritually too, don't we? We have spiritual gaps in our growth, and maybe you're walking through one of those. So today, I want to look at this story of Jesus and unpack at least 3 things that will help us fill the gap with our growth. Number 1 is be growth-minded. Be growth-minded. Verses 41 through 47, we see some of the development and the growth of Jesus, but it ends with verse 52, which says, Jesus, the Son of God, the creator of the universe, he grew, he increased, in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with man. And we don't think of Jesus as one who needs to grow. Can I get an amen? Some of you feel pretty discouraged. It's like, if Jesus needed to grow, I'm in trouble. But here's what we see is that Jesus grew. He increased. And so the question is begged then, how does an omniscient, all-knowing God grow? How do those things come together? How does the Son of God grow? And Paul, the Apostle Paul in Philippians, you don't have to turn there, but Philippians 2, 6 through 8, I think he answers that pretty well for us. Philippians 2, 6 through 8. Jesus, even though he was, quote here, he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being in human form, he humbled himself. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 36, we see that Jesus even tells us only the Father knows the day, the moment, the time when his return would happen. He didn't even know all of that. So Jesus laid down a few of the attributes of God, the things that he had right at his fingertips so that he could be made in human form, so he could be fully God, all of those things at his fingertips. He made himself nothing. He didn't count that equality as something to hold on to. Why? Here's the thing. We can't know what's all behind the mind of God in these kind of things. Deuteronomy 29:29 says the secret things belong to the Lord, but the things revealed belong to us and our sons forever. That means God sometimes reveals to us the things that we can grasp and understand, but there's going to be things we don't get. And I don't totally understand how God could be fully God, fully man at the same moment, but I love that God's revealed to us all we need to know about how he did that, why he did that, and I believe a big part of it is so that in Hebrews it tells us that we don't have a high priest, that's Jesus, who is unable to sympathize with us in our weaknesses. He walked where we walked, he talked where we talked, and he laid some things down so that he could grow and change just like we grow and change, so he could walk with you and I as we have to grow. I love that I have that kind of God. Am I alone with that? Does anybody else feel glad to know that you have a high priest who knows where you're at and loves you and chose to walk where you have walked? But verse 42, we see that Jesus was 12 years old. And that's significant because that would be the last year before a 13-year-old young man would begin to participate in and walk in all of the temple ceremonies. And Luke goes to great lengths to record the fact that Jesus and his family were Jewish, and they lived by those principles every single day as he's convincing Theophilus and all of us of the credibility of his account. But then it's a whole day's journey, verses 43 and 44. Can you imagine? That would be like going from Fort Wayne to Milwaukee or something like that. Can you imagine getting that far and going, hey, you seen Jesus? Yeah, he's back with those people. They travel with other people. Yeah, he's back there. Okay, well, I'm just going to go check to be sure. Jesus. You know, I can only imagine what would happen. The Bible doesn't tell us, but you could imagine as a parent that awful feeling where your stomach drops and you realize there's no Jesus. My child is not where they're supposed to be. Now, I'll tell you, we don't want this as a parent, do we? We don't want that moment. Some of you have experienced that moment. I will not ask for a show of hands. I can tell you, I've not yet had that moment, and I pray that I don't have that as a sermon illustration to share with you one day. I hope I don't have that story to share, but I do have one from my childhood where my father, my younger sister, who's 2 years younger than me, I was probably only 7 or 8 years old, so she was a young little girl. We were in a hospital, and we were on an elevator, and we got off the elevator, we not meaning all three of us, we meaning myself and my father, and we turned around to see the door close and a little red-headed girl going inside like this. And the door closed, and she was in there, and I've never seen my father. He's shorter than me, but he was like a big football player, picked me up under his arm like a football, and had the presence of mind somehow to look at where the elevator was going. He saw that it was going up, so of course he had to go up the stairs. He went up the stairs with me. I've never seen him be that strong in his life. But he carried me like a football, and then we found my little sister with a nurse, and I'll never forget that, how my dad was going to protect me. He was going to overcome this obstacle. And so I'll never forget how God does that, how he did that, but I'll also never forget how my God does that. He seeks me out. He'll pick me up and carry me. He'll chase us down. And I'll never forget that picture of my father doing that and how even Jesus' parents are doing that here. But verses 45 through 47, let's talk about this for a minute. The creator of knowledge was absorbing knowledge. He was listening and asking questions. So I want to propose something to you. You said, this has been great background. I've learned some things about Jesus, but what about me? And I want to propose this to you. If the creator of knowledge, if Jesus himself, the Son of God, is choosing to grow and to learn, don't you think we should too? And that's why I believe what we can learn from this story to fill the gaps in our growth is to be willing to be growth-minded. This is a great story for you spiritually. This is a great story for you if you're parents. It's not, the moral of the story is not don't lose your children. That would be a good starting place. But be willing to be growth-minded. And to be growth-minded, you have to be open-minded. You have to have open hands. You have to have an open mind. You have to have an open heart. Because I believe this with all my heart. You ready for it? Jot this down. I believe that closed-minded people close minds. And God has called us to have an open heart, open minds to what He wants to do in us so that we can grow and even realize that sometimes we may not have it all figured out like we thought. That we can ask questions, that we can grow, that things we thought might be what it should look like or true, that we haven't nailed down, we might need to grow in some areas. And if Jesus Himself, yes, He was 12, but He's the Son of God. If Jesus modeled growth for us, maybe, just maybe, we should follow after His example. I believe that open-mindedness means holding on to a message that is never changing, but realizing that methods change. We live in a changing world. You heard the panel talk about how education has changed, technology has changed, and every day it shifts and it changed. But the beauty of knowing Jesus is that He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so we have in Jesus a never-changing Savior. We have in Jesus a never-changing gospel. We have in Jesus a never-changing God. But the beauty of growing and having an open heart and an open mind, a growth mindset, is that we get to take the never-changing truth of the gospel into an ever-changing world around us. While our message never changes, while our Jesus never changes, we're willing to do whatever it takes with our methodology to reach people for Jesus. That is a truth for the church as a whole, but that is a truth for you as you choose to be the church at work. We're not just called to go to church, we're called to be the church. And that's how we do it, when we take the never-changing truth message of the gospel to an ever-changing world, willing to do whatever it takes like Jesus did to grow and be an impact and be a light in other people. It's the difference in theology and ministry. It's why there's a lot of fights in church. When things change sometimes, because we often tie ministry to theology, but those are two very distinct things. Theology is who God is. That never changes. Ministry changes every single day, depending on what opportunities God puts in front of you. Jesus modeled that. He never changed who He was. He never changed why He was there. His purpose never shifted, but He always changed how He communicated. He always changed how He was the truth. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. He changed what that looked like in methodology and ministry everywhere that He went. That's what growth-minded people do. We take the never-changing truth of Jesus into an ever-changing world with a growth mindset, and we're not those people who have a closed mind that often closes the minds and the hearts of other people. Well, you have a growth mindset. That's how we light the 1-5. That's how we take a light into the dark places, a growth mindset. Number 2, verses 48 and 49, action-oriented. We not are just only called to be growth-minded, but also action-oriented. Verses 48 and 49 are huge verses. We see that that's when they come back together. Verse 48, hey, your father and I have been searching for you, Jesus. And He says, why are you looking for me? And it's like, why would a 12-year-old ask that? Why? Because it's been 3 days. Of course I'm looking for you. But He's saying, you should know where I'm at. I've got to be in my Father's house. The word could be translated about my Father's business, His purpose, His mission. He said, I got to be action-oriented. I got to do something with why I'm here. I got to do something with my purpose. You should have known that, father and mother. But they took action. You talk about action-oriented. You want to get action-oriented, lose your child, right? So Mary and Joseph, they took action, but they found Jesus taking action in the temple, listening, asking questions, growing in His truth. And I love that we get to see that about Jesus. And I told you earlier, next week, you want to be action-oriented in your faith? Come next week. We're going to talk about being missionaries at work. And I'm going to convince you. I'm going to go and put all my cards on the table. I'm going to spill the beans. My sole job, our panel's sole job next week, is to convince you that you are a missionary. It's not just people who travel around the world. And we want to give you opportunities to be the light of Jesus in some dark places, even in our city, in some ways that may stretch you. That's all I'm going to tell you. You got to come back next week to find out how, and I want to invite you to do just that. But I love that Jesus was about his Father's business. He was action-oriented. And I want to give you a couple of statements that I believe can help you. I believe that awareness without action is apathy. Awareness without action is apathy. Power without purpose is pointless. If we have power, if we have awareness, we are equipped with knowledge, but we do nothing with it, it's dead. Faith without works is dead. That's where it comes together. It's not that our works get us to a place of faith so that we can have salvation. If that's the truth, we're in trouble. Faith saves me. I'm saved by grace through faith alone in Jesus, but that faith compels me to go and to be, not just to do, but to be who God has called me to be action-oriented, to look for ways to be the light in the darkness. In your notes, education. I'm a big believer in education. I've gone to seminary. I'm still working in seminary even today. I believe in it. But I want you to know, if I've learned anything about education, while I believe in it with all my heart, educators at work today, and so I'm going to say something that might even rub you wrong. It's not that it's not true. It's not that we don't need education, but I want you to know that education without evidence is empty. If we are educated, if we're equipped with knowledge, but we don't take it somewhere, and we don't say, God, here's how you have built me up, like Jesus did. Jesus even grew. He believed in education. He sat and asked questions, and he listened. But why did he do it? He did it so that he could be about his Father's business. So education without evidence, without action, without going, just leads to emptiness. Perhaps that's you. You filled the bookshelves with Bible studies. But you've yet to implement. You've yet to say, all right, well, I'm going to pour into the lives of children or youth or young adults or senior adults or anybody in between or above or below that. But it's time to say, I'm going to be action-oriented because my Jesus, even at 12 years old, was action-oriented. Some of you are here and you would say, I don't have the education like that panel. Say, Pastor, you talked about you have education, and I don't have education. If that's you, look at me for a minute. I want you to hear me loud and clear. I would rather be ignorance on fire for God than intelligence on ice any day. Jesus took the most uneducated, unequipped, unable people, and he changed history. What makes you think he won't do the same with you? He is too good to let your weaknesses hold back his mission and his methods and his plans and his purposes for your life. And hear me when I tell you, he's got a plan for you. I don't care what your background is. Keep growing. If it means to go enroll in some education, go for it. But follow the Spirit's lead. He doesn't need what wasn't in your past to do what he wants to do in your future. That's the God that I serve. So will you just be on fire for him, even if you feel unintelligent, even if you feel ill-equipped? Will you be people-focused? That's number 3. Focus on people. That's what Jesus did. So what focus was Jesus being action-oriented for? One simple word: people. Verses 50 and 52, we see that, and we see that he was growth-minded. We see that he was action-oriented, but he was people-focused. Verse 48 and 49, I want to go back to that for just a second. Mary said, hey, Jesus, your Father and I, underline your Father, and I think this is the point of the passage here, your Father and I. And his response, he said, your Father and I have been looking for you. We've been in much distress. And Jesus, in verse 49, says, why are you looking for me? Didn't you know I would have to be about, he goes from your father, Joseph, earthly father, to, didn't you know I'd have to be about my Father's business? Didn't you know I'd be in my Father's house? That's what Luke is capturing. That's the point of this story, is that Jesus understood his sonship in God, that he was the Son of God, that his purpose was bigger than just what his earthly identity could afford. He understood his spiritual identity, who he was, and it led him to his mission. And the same is true for us. It goes from your Father and I to no, my Father is in heaven. And I want to make this personal for you. Your identity will always drive your implementation. You want to be action-oriented? You want to implement something? You will not go further with that implementation than you have solidified in your identity. In your notes, I put it this way: if you don't know your identity, it'll be hard to help others find theirs. You want to be a minister to other people. You want to pour into the lives of other people. It starts with knowing your identity. Verse 50 says they didn't understand. It was a theme in Jesus' life and ministry. In fact, Luke 18, verse 34, after Jesus had predicted his death and resurrection for the third time. By the way, if you're struggling with the gospel, if you're struggling with the credibility of the accounts of Luke or of Jesus, if you're struggling with how solid the Bible is, how trustworthy the Bible is, if that's you today, I'm just going to tell you, if I know somebody who predicts his own death and resurrection 3 times and he pulls it off and it happens as he said, I'm going to take his word for it. And I love that that's my Jesus, that's what the writers of the gospel preserved for us, that we have a credible, true account of a real and living God, and that's why I love God's word with all of my heart, because he shows me who he is. He shows me who he is so I can know who I am, and that my identity can now be something that leads me to fill the gaps in my growth. Jesus took action, verses 51 and 52. He took action to grow so he could go. Why did he do that? He submitted to his parents so that he could then be all about people. You notice he left submitting to his parents and he followed them, but things didn't stop there for Jesus. Have you read the rest of the book? I've read what happens after this, and he made his mission a reality. He went after people. He was people-focused. You know who those people are? You. The greatest educator who ever lived is Jesus, and he focused on making people, building people, helping them know their identity, not just training people up to change things, to do things, to be things, to make things. No, he made people. He built their identity. That's what he wants to do in your life today. Back to our original question. So today, how do we fill the gaps in our growth? That's our original question. I want to take us back there. So if you want to fill the gap in your growth, I want to suggest a few things to you. Let's work on being growth-minded, action-oriented, people-focused. You'll start to see the gaps in your growth start to close. Why? Because you're so good? No, because you're following a model that Jesus put forth. You want to fill the gaps in your growth? Let's do it Jesus' way. I want to ask you just to bow your heads, close your eyes, consider the gaps in your growth. And some of you are here today and you're a believer and you would say, I know Jesus today, but I've got some steps in my growth I've got to take. I've got to be action-oriented. I've got to be more people-focused. I've got to be more growth-minded. But some of you would say today that the gap in my growth is that I haven't surrendered fully to Jesus. You would say today, I just don't know that if I were to die today, I'd spend eternity with Jesus. I just don't know, but I sure would like to. If that is you today, I want to challenge you to pause. Don't move, don't think, don't move to something else. Just stop what you're doing and realize that you'll never be good enough for salvation. None of us are, but Jesus already was. Even a 12-year-old Jesus pointed us to that purpose and that mission. So if that's you, the gospel is simple. I'm not going to lead you in a prayer because I think your heart is screaming it. God wants to hear from you. Salvation comes from surrender, where you say, I can't save me, so Jesus, I need you to save me. Jesus paid a price you could never pay by dying on the cross for your sin. After living the sinless life you could never live, he who knew no sin became sin so that you could become the righteousness of God. Then after 3 days, he rose from the dead. He is alive. He didn't let the story stop there, so that you could not fight for a victory, so you could start to fight from a victory he's already won. If that's you, will you pause right where you sit? If you don't have that nailed down, don't leave today. I beg you, don't walk out of here without knowing. If that's you, cry out to him right now, at home, online, TV, in the room, wherever you're at. Pause, cry out to him. Nobody's looking around for just a moment. I just want to celebrate with you. In just a moment, you'll hear some next steps from Pastor Wees of what you can do if you took that step. But before we do that, I just want to pray for you. I want to celebrate what God's done in your life. If that is you, today you have nailed down your salvation. Let me pray for you right now, just by simply slipping your hand up and say, pray for me, Pastor. Today's that day. Nobody's looking around, but hands are raised if that is you. Right now, show me if that's you, so I can pray for you. Anybody? Say, today's the day. God bless you, sir. I see you in the back. God bless you. Thanks for your boldness. Who else? I see you. Man, God bless you. Who else? Hands down. God, thank you today for salvation. God, you meet us where we are to change lives. God, thank you for those who've taken that step. And thank you for those also, God, who are taking steps. They are already believers, but you've given them a step to take and they're ready to take it, to fill some of those gaps in their growth, being growth-minded, action-oriented, and people-focused like you were. But today, God, we stop and pause and we celebrate with the angels in heaven who are today rejoicing because of any soul who comes to the saving knowledge of Jesus. God, thank you for salvation. Thank you for grace. Thank you that we can have faith in something that's real, something that's true, something that goes beyond this temporary life to eternity. God, we praise you. We celebrate. We thank you for those who have come to the saving knowledge of Jesus, entering from death to life because of Jesus. We ask it all in Jesus' precious holy name. And all God's people said, amen. Will you celebrate? Let's welcome these to the family of God.